the cabin where the snow refused to settle. I rented the cabin in late January because I needed absolute silence to finish my thesis. No roommates, no coffee shop chatter, no distractions. Just me, my laptop, and 2 weeks of uninterrupted solitude in the mountains. The property manager met me at the bottom of the access road with the keys. She was older, maybe 70, with the kind of weathered face you get from living at elevation your whole life. She told me the cabin had been in her family for 3 generations and that I was lucky to get it this time of year. "One thing," she said as she handed over the keys, "don't worry about the snow. It does that sometimes." I asked her what she meant, but she was already walking back to her truck. I figured she was talking about drifts or maybe ice dams on the roof. Mountain people say things like that. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. It was exactly what I needed. 1 bedroom, a wood stove, a kitchen table big enough for my research materials. The internet was supposedly decent, though the signal came from a satellite dish bolted to the roof. I unpacked my things and got to work. The first 3 days were perfect. I wrote more in those 72 hours than I had in the previous month. The silence was absolute. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. On the 4th morning, I woke to find snow falling outside my window. Except it wasn't falling down, it was falling up. I stood at the window for a full minute, watching the flakes drift lazily toward the sky. They emerged from the ground like tiny white moths, spiraling upward until they disappeared into the low gray clouds. I rubbed my eyes. I checked the time to make sure I was actually awake. I was. I went outside in my boots and jacket. The air was cold and still. Around the cabin, snow was definitely moving upward. I could see it rising from the ground in slow, steady streams. But beyond the clearing, in the forest, normal snow fell downward from the sky like it was supposed to. There was a border, a perfect circle around the cabin where the laws of physics had apparently decided to take a break. I walked to the edge of the upward falling snow. At the boundary, I could see both directions at once. Flakes falling down from above, flakes rising up from below, meeting at an invisible line and somehow not colliding. They just passed through each other and continued in their wrong directions. I stepped across the boundary. Nothing happened. I stepped back. The upward snow continued its slow ascent. I took out my phone and recorded a video, though I wasn't sure anyone would believe it wasn't doctored. Then I went inside and tried to convince myself it didn't matter. Weird atmospheric phenomenon, freak microclimate, temperature inversion. I wasn't a meteorologist. I was here to write about medieval land contracts, not explain impossible weather, but I couldn't stop watching it. Every time I looked up from my laptop, my eyes went to the window. The snow kept rising. It never stopped. It never accumulated on the ground either. The moment the flakes emerged, they began their journey upward. On the 5th day, I noticed the first object. It was small, barely visible against the white of the snow. A coin, I thought at first. But when I went outside to look closer, I saw it was a button. Old-fashioned, made of tarnished brass. It rose slowly past my face, spinning gently and disappeared into the clouds. I watched for more. Within an hour, I saw 3 more buttons, then a rusted nail, then something that looked like a fragment of pottery. They were coming up from underground. The snow was bringing things with it. I called the property manager. Her phone rang 8 times before going to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me back. She didn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting up to look out the window. The snow continued its wrong-way journey and more objects came with it. A fork with a bent tine, a piece of blue glass worn smooth, a child's marble. They all rose past the cabin and vanished into the dark sky. I started making a list of everything I saw. I don't know why. Maybe I thought documentation would make it feel less insane. By morning, I had recorded 43 objects. Most were small and damaged. A few were identifiable, many weren't. On the 6th day, the snow brought up a photograph. It was old, black and white, the edges yellowed and curled. I managed to catch it before it rose too high. The paper was damp and fragile, but the image was clear enough. A family standing in front of this cabin. A man, a woman, 2 children. They were dressed in clothes from maybe the 1950s. The woman was holding a baby. I looked at the cabin in the photograph. Same porch, same windows, same door, but there was something else in the picture behind the family, a dark shape in the trees, too tall to be a person, too angular to be natural. I put the photograph on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Then I called the property manager again. This time, someone else answered. A man, younger, maybe her son. "She's not available," he said when I asked for her. "I need to know about the cabin's history," I told him. "About the people who lived here." There was a long pause. "What's happening there?" "The snow," I said. "It's falling upward. It's bringing things up from underground." Another pause, then, "You should leave." "What happened here?" "My grandmother doesn't rent that cabin in winter anymore. She hasn't in 20 years. I don't know who you talked to or who gave you those keys, but you need to get out. Now." The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen, holding my phone, trying to process what he'd said. The old woman at the bottom of the access road, the keys, the cabin that had supposedly been in her family for 3 generations. I went to the window. The snow was still rising, but faster now, and there were more objects. Dozens of them, hundreds. They came up in streams, spinning and tumbling. I saw spoons and spectacles and pieces of cloth. I saw a doll's head, its painted face cracked and faded. I saw a belt buckle. I saw teeth. I grabbed my laptop and my bag. I didn't bother with anything else. I just needed to get to my car and drive down the access road and put as much distance between myself and this place as possible. But when I opened the door, I stopped. The clearing was full of upward falling snow, so thick now I could barely see the trees beyond. And rising through it, slowly emerging from the ground like something being born, was a hand. It was pale and thin, the skin tight over bone. The fingers were curled, grasping at nothing. It rose inch by inch, pulled by the same force that pulled the snow. An arm followed, a shoulder, a head. The face was gaunt and hollow-eyed, the mouth open in a silent scream. It wasn't a corpse, not exactly. It moved, the fingers flexed. The head turned slowly as if looking for something. Then another hand broke through the ground, and another, and another. They rose all around the cabin, these impossible figures pulled from the earth by the upward snow. Some were whole. Some were just pieces. All of them moved with that same slow, grasping motion, reaching for a sky they would never hold. I slammed the door and locked it. I backed away until I hit the far wall. Through the window, I watched them rise. There were dozens now, maybe more. They ascended past the cabin, past the roof, into the clouds, but more kept coming. The ground kept giving them up. I understood then. This wasn't a phenomenon. It wasn't weather. It was the earth trying to correct itself. Trying to return what shouldn't have been buried here, what had been hidden. The property manager's words came back to me, "Don't worry about the snow. It does that sometimes, not always, sometimes, when something needs to come back up." I stayed away from the windows. I sat at the kitchen table with the old photograph and tried to think. The cabin in the picture, the family, the dark shape in the trees behind them. I looked at that shape again, really looked. It wasn't in the trees. It was in the ground behind them. A shadow, a stain. The photograph had captured it by accident, the way cameras sometimes see what we don't. The snow fell upward for 3 more days. I didn't leave the cabin. I couldn't. Every time I went to the door, I saw them rising, more and more of them, until the air was full of reaching hands and hollow faces and silent screams. On the 10th day, it stopped. The snow began falling down again, normal and quiet. The figures were gone. The objects were gone. The ground around the cabin looked undisturbed, covered in fresh white powder. I walked to my car. The keys were still in my pocket. The car started on the first try. I drove down the access road without looking back. I never finished my thesis. I couldn't focus on medieval land contracts after that. I kept thinking about what was under the ground, what the earth had been trying to give back. 6 months later, I saw a news article. They'd found remains near a mountain cabin. Multiple individuals, buried decades ago. The cabin belonged to a family named Thorne. The matriarch had died the previous spring. Her son was cooperating with investigators. The article included an old photograph of the cabin, the same one I'd caught in the upward falling snow. But in the newspaper version, digitally cleaned and enhanced, I could see the dark shape behind the family more clearly. It wasn't a shadow. It was a hole, freshly dug, waiting? Drop your verdict in the comments. Wait, what?